Picture this scene. A powerful CEO screaming in desperation in a boardroom, Russian hackers blackmailing his company for millions, and then a 19-year-old delivery guy walks into the room and changes everything with a single phrase in perfect Russian. Sounds like fiction? Well, this is the true story of how Kevin Chen transformed the most humiliating moment of his life into the day he saved an entire company. Before we begin this incredible journey, let me know in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? When Kevin Chen stepped onto the 42nd floor of Megacorp Technologies that grey Seattle morning, he had no idea that in the next 2 hours he would experience the most transformative moments of his young life. The aroma of premium coffee mixed with the smell of leather from executive furniture hung in the air, while the muffled sound of tense conversations leaked from the conference rooms. Kevin adjusted the strap of his backpack on his shoulder and took a deep breath, feeling the cold glass of the windows contrast with the nervous heat that sprouted from his sweaty palms. It was his 21st day as a company delivery guy, a part-time job he balanced between cybersecurity classes and his nights dedicated to ethical hacking. At 19, Kevin had the kind of appearance that made people underestimate his intelligence: perfectly styled K-pop hair, symmetrical face, and an athletic physique maintained by disciplined hours at the gym. But behind those almond-shaped eyes was a sharp mind that had already discovered vulnerabilities in million-dollar corporate systems, earning rewards and international recognition in the cybersecurity community. That morning, however, he was just another young man trying to help his family. His mother had spent another sleepless night at the hospital, and medical bills continued to pile up while his father worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat. Kevin gripped the envelope with documents for signature and walked down the black marble corridor toward the executive conference room, where a crisis was about to explode in ways no one could predict. The tempered glass of the conference room vibrated slightly with the intensity of the raised voices inside. Kevin hesitated at the door, observing through the transparent glass a scene that seemed straight out of a corporate thriller. Richard Blackstone, the 55-year-old CEO known for his imposing presence and always impeccable suit, paced back and forth, like a caged animal. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the phone on speaker, and for the first time since Kevin had known him, the man who commanded a technological empire seemed vulnerable. «Мы получили доступ через вашу дочь. У вас есть 2 часа. 50 миллионов биткоинов или мы публикуем все». The robotic, cold voice echoing through the speaker made Kevin freeze in place. He understood every word perfectly. «We gained access through your daughter. You have 2 hours. 50 million in Bitcoin or we publish everything». His heart raced when he realized the gravity of the situation. Years of studying with Russian hackers on international security forums had made the language familiar to him, but he never imagined this knowledge would be useful outside the virtual world. «My daughter Emma?» Blackstone's voice cracked with emotion and desperation. «What do you mean through my daughter?» The 5 executives around the oval table looked like fish out of water, whispering among themselves in controlled panic. «What are they saying?» asked the CFO, her hands intertwined so tightly that her knuckles were white. «How the hell did they get into our system?» Kevin watched the red numbers flashing on screens scattered around the room, data from 2 million customers under threat, company stock plummeting in real time in the Asian market. His hacker mind automatically began mapping possible attack vectors, but before he could fully process the situation, he knocked discreetly on the door. The silence that followed was like the eye of a storm, tense, heavy, charged with electricity. All eyes turned to him through the glass, and Kevin felt his stomach contract when he saw the expression of pure fury on Blackstone's face. «Come in!» Blackstone's voice didn't sound like an imperial command, but like the desperate cry of a man on the edge of the abyss. Kevin pushed the door carefully and immediately noticed that something was deeply wrong. Richard Blackstone wasn't walking with his usual authoritative posture. Instead, he was hunched over the conference table, his head in his hands, fingers intertwined in his perfectly combed grey hair that now looked disheveled. His Armani suit, always impeccable, was wrinkled at the shoulders as if he had slept in it. What shocked Kevin most was seeing Blackstone's phone screen lit up next to his right hand, displaying a photo of a smiling blonde young woman, clearly his daughter Emma. The image contrasted cruelly with the palpable desperation that filled every inch of that room. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackstone," Kevin murmured, his voice instinctively lower in the face of the vulnerability he was witnessing. "I have some documents that need your signature for—" Blackstone slowly lifted his head. His blue eyes, normally penetrating and confident, were red and glazed, not with anger, but with pure panic and emotional exhaustion. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 2 hours. When he spoke, his voice came out hoarse, broken, almost unrecognizable. "Not now," he whispered first. Then his voice gained volume from frustration, but not from cruelty. "For the love of God, we don't have time for this." His hand trembled as he pointed toward the door, and Kevin could see unshed tears in the corners of his eyes. They attacked through my Emma, my own daughter." His voice failed. "Get out, please." The please hit Kevin like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't an order from a tyrant to a subordinate. It was the broken plea of a father who saw everything he had built, not for himself but as a legacy for his only daughter, being destroyed because of her own innocence. The executives in the room didn't look away in embarrassment at their boss's cruelty. They exchanged looks of genuine concern, clearly alarmed to see the man who had always commanded with an iron fist falling apart in front of them. This wasn't the Richard Blackstone they knew. This was a terrified father. Watching his family under attack, Kevin felt the heat of humiliation rise up his neck, but mixed with it, for the first time, there was something unexpected: compassion. He could hear in Blackstone's broken voice echoes of his own pain that he felt every time he saw his mother in the hospital, the same feeling of helplessness in the face of a crisis that seemed bigger than his capabilities. He pressed the documents against his chest and murmured a genuinely gentle, "Sorry, sir." His legs felt heavy as he walked to the door, each step echoing in the tense silence of the room. He could feel not the pitying looks of the executives, but something deeper, the shared recognition that they were all witnessing a powerful man being broken by the love he felt for his daughter. The door closed behind him with a click that sounded less like a sentence and more like the closing of a painful chapter. Kevin stood in the hallway, breathing deeply, but now his mind wasn't just processing his own pain. He was thinking about Blackstone's broken voice repeating, "My own daughter." The golden elevator at Megacorp had always seemed too opulent for Kevin, with its immaculate mirrors and soft LED lights that made everything look like a luxury commercial. But now, alone in that silent space as he descended the 42 floors, he found himself face to face with his own reflection and with the moral dilemma that grew in his chest like physical pressure. He wasn't being cruel, Kevin thought, surprising himself with his own thoughts. He was broken, completely broken. The image of Blackstone hunched over the table, his daughter's photo next to his trembling hands, replayed in his mind like a looping film. Kevin pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the elevator and closed his eyes. He's a desperate father. Any father would do the same thing if he saw his daughter being used to destroy everything he built for her. The anger he had initially felt was being replaced by a reluctant but real understanding. But then the robotic voice in Russian echoed in his mind. "We gained access through your daughter." I understood every word. They got in through Emma. His mind began to automatically connect the dots. Classic social engineering, probably a targeted phishing attack, malware infiltrated through Blackstone's daughter's personal device. He had studied dozens of similar cases, had even helped prevent similar attacks for other companies in his ethical hacking work. This isn't just about him being rude to me, he realized, feeling the weight of the realization tighten his chest. It's 2 million customers, hundreds of employees who will lose their jobs if the company goes under. People like me who need this job to survive. And Emma. If she finds out she was used this way, she'll blame herself for the rest of her life. The elevator reached the 20th floor when Kevin remembered a conversation he had had with his mother the previous week, during one of his nightly visits to the hospital. She was particularly weak that day, but her words came out with the force of a conviction built over decades. "Kevin, when you see someone hurt, even if that person hurt you first, and you have the power to help, do it. Not because they deserve it, but because that's what makes us truly human. Revenge might hurt the enemy, but compassion heals our own soul." Kevin looked at his own reflection in the glass. Young, hurt, but with knowledge that could. make the difference between destruction and salvation for thousands of people. Blackstone isn't my enemy. He's just a terrified father who saw everything he built for his daughter being threatened. His hand moved almost on its own, pressing the button that stopped the elevator on the 15th floor. For a moment he was suspended in space and time, weighing two choices that would define not only his character, but potentially the fate of thousands of people. If I leave now, I'm just another offended young man going home to cry. If I go back, I could be the difference between a family destroying itself and a family becoming stronger. Kevin took a deep breath, smelling the metallic scent of the elevator mixed with the soft aroma of his own cologne. He thought about his mother in the hospital, about Blackstone broken over the table, about Emma's photo glowing on the phone screen, and about all the innocent people who would suffer if he let pride speak louder than compassion. With a decisive movement, he pressed the button for the 42nd floor and felt the elevator rise again. He wasn't going back to prove his superiority or to humiliate those who had hurt him. He was going back because sometimes being strong means helping precisely those who couldn't be strong with us. The elevator doors opened with a mechanical whisper, and Kevin stepped back onto the 42nd floor with a completely different posture. No longer the insecure young delivery guy who had been kicked out minutes before, but someone carrying a purpose that burned in his chest like embers. The hallway looked the same: polished black marble, LED lights embedded in the ceiling, the subtle aroma of industrial cleaning mixed with premium coffee. But something fundamental had changed in the way Kevin moved through the space. Through the glass of the conference room, he could see that the situation had deteriorated. Blackstone was hunched over the table, his head in his hands, while the executives spoke in urgent whispers. The screens around the room showed even redder numbers, and Kevin noticed that one of them displayed a digital countdown, 1 hour and 23 minutes remaining. He knocked on the door again, this time more firmly. "I told you to!" Blackstone began shouting before even lifting his head, but stopped abruptly when he saw Kevin standing at the door with a calm but determined expression. Confusion replaced anger on the CEO's face. "What? Why did you come back?" Kevin entered the room, without waiting for permission, feeling all eyes on him once more. But now the weight of those gazes was different, not of judgment or pity, but of genuine curiosity. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackstone," he said, his voice firmer than before. "I can help with this." "Help with what?" The CFO frowned. "You don't even know what we're talking about." Kevin looked directly at Blackstone, ignoring the sarcasm from the others. "I know you're being blackmailed. I know the attackers mentioned your daughter, Emma, and I know you have a little over an hour to resolve this before the data of 2 million customers gets leaked." The silence that followed was different from the previous one, not of shock or embarrassment, but of absolute attention. Kevin could hear his own heart beating, but kept his voice calm and controlled. "I understand what they're saying, sir. They got into the system through your daughter. It's a classic social engineering attack, and I know exactly how they did it." Blackstone slowly straightened up, his blue eyes studying Kevin with new intensity. You understood what they said? In Russian?" "Perfectly." Kevin took a step forward, feeling the change in the room's atmosphere. "And I didn't just understand the words. I understood the strategy. I can help you get out of this situation." What happened in the next few seconds would be etched in the memory of everyone in the room for the rest of their lives. Blackstone, still processing Kevin's words, shook his head with growing impatience. "We don't have time for child's games. You're just a... Slushait меня в атаковали через дочь." Kevin's voice cut through the air like a sonic explosion. The shout in perfect Russian, "Listen to me, you attacked through the daughter," reverberated off the glass walls of the conference room with an authority that no one expected from someone so young. The sound seemed to suspend time, freezing each person present in their places like statues. The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin could hear his own breathing, the almost imperceptible hum of electronic equipment, even the distant ticking of a clock somewhere in the office. Blackstone was speechless, his hands frozen in the air in the middle of an interrupted gesture. The 5 executives seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. For a moment that seemed to last an eternity. No one moved. It was as if the entire universe had paused to absorb what had just happened. The young delivery guy who minutes before had been humiliated and expelled, now commanded the room with a presence that filled every inch of the space. "You," Blackstone finally managed to articulate, his voice coming out as a rough whisper. "You understood everything this whole time?" Kevin lowered his voice but maintained his upright and confident posture. "Perfectly, Mr. Blackstone. I understand Russian fluently, and more importantly, I know exactly how these attackers got into your system and how we can control this situation before it's too late." The transformation in the room's dynamics was almost physical. Where before there had been contempt and impatience, now there was absolute attention, and in Blackstone's eyes, something that looked suspiciously like growing respect. Kevin walked to the conference table with measured steps, his presence now naturally commanding the space that minutes before had rejected him. He placed his hands flat on the black glass surface and looked directly at each person present, including Blackstone, who had raised his head and was watching him with a mixture of surprise and desperate hope. "Mr. Blackstone," Kevin began, his voice calm but loaded with genuine authority, "what you just witnessed wasn't theater. I really do understand Russian fluently, and more importantly, I understand exactly how these attackers got into your system." He paused, allowing his words to be absorbed, then continued with the simplicity his audience deserved, without unnecessary technical jargon. "They used your daughter Emma, but not because she did anything wrong. She was a calculated target. CEO's daughter, young, probably active on social media." Kevin watched Blackstone lean forward, hanging on every word. "It's like a thief who studies a house for weeks before trying to break in. They studied Emma, discovered her weaknesses, and then created a trap specifically for her." The IT director, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. "How do you know all this?" Kevin turned to her with genuine respect. "Because I've spent the last 3 years studying exactly these types of attacks. I work as an ethical hacker. I help companies discover their vulnerabilities before criminals find them." He paused, letting the information be absorbed. "I've already helped more than 20 major companies protect themselves, including Megacorp itself last year, when I discovered a flaw in your payment systems." The silence that followed wasn't one of shock, but of growing recognition. Blackstone closed his eyes for a moment, clearly processing how wrong he had been about the young man in front of him. "But here's what they didn't realize," Kevin continued, allowing himself a slight smile. "By specifically mentioning Emma, by using family against you, they revealed that they're amateurs posing as professionals. Experienced hackers never give unnecessary personal information." "What do you propose?" Blackstone asked, his voice now stripped of any trace of previous arrogance replaced by genuine humility. Kevin moved to the computer connected to the speaker. "I can make them believe they've been discovered. I won't go into complicated technical details, but I can pose as someone they would fear. A Russian investigator tracking their operation." His fingers already hovered over the keyboard. "People who do this kind of crime always run when they believe authorities are close. And if it doesn't work?" The CFO looked skeptical, but hopeful. Kevin looked at him with a confidence that came not from arrogance, but from experience. "Then we implement other measures. We have options, but it won't be necessary." He turned his attention back to Blackstone. "May I try?" For the first time in 2 hours, Richard Blackstone nodded with something resembling hope. Kevin's transformation when he sat in front of the computer was like watching a virtuoso musician find his favorite instrument. His fingers began to work with a natural fluidity that impressed everyone in the room, while command screens appeared with a speed that demonstrated years of dedicated practice. "First, I need to create a convincing identity," Kevin murmured, more to himself than to the others, completely absorbed in his element. "I'm going to build a profile that will make them believe they're dealing with someone they would really fear." The screens around the room began displaying information in Cyrillic, pages that appeared to be from Russian government sites, data that made the executives exchange looks of growing admiration. In a matter of minutes, Kevin had created a convincing digital identity for a cybercrime investigator named Major Alexander Volkov. "The psychology here is simple," Kevin explained while working. "Amateur criminals are always afraid of being discovered by real authorities. I'm going to make them believe their operation has already been identified and they're being tracked." The phone rang exactly 17 minutes later, as Kevin had predicted. He took a deep breath, adjusted the microphone, and answered with a completely different voice, deeper, loaded with military authority and speaking Russian with a convincing Moscow accent. «Эта линия прослушивается. Операция раскрыта. Вы должны прекратить немедленно. This line is being monitored. The operation has been exposed. You must stop immediately». What followed was a 15-minute conversation that kept everyone in the room in absolute suspense. Kevin alternated between calmly delivered threats and specific information that only someone with access to intelligence resources could have. He mentioned operation codes that sounded authentic, made references to international criminal databases, and even suggested false geographical coordinates that implied the hacker's location had already been tracked. But Kevin wasn't just a convincing actor. He was a strategist. During the conversation, he took advantage of moments of silence from the criminals to discreetly trace the origin of their communications, identifying vulnerabilities in their own protection system that could be exploited if the bluff didn't work. You have 5 minutes to delete all stolen data and completely cut access to Megacorp's systems, Kevin said with calculated coldness. Otherwise, coordinates of your location will be passed to local and international authorities. When he finally hung up, Kevin leaned back in his chair, looking simultaneously exhausted and triumphant. The smile on his face said everything before he even spoke. "Did it work?" Blackstone asked, his voice laden with cautious hope. "Perfectly." They went into total panic, thought they were being investigated by Russian and American agencies simultaneously. Kevin pointed to the screens around the room. "They've already started deleting all stolen data and are cutting access to the company's systems. They'll spend the next few months hiding, convinced they're internationally wanted." The countdown. On the main screen now flashed green, threat neutralized. Kevin turned to Blackstone with a serious expression. "But this is just the first step, Mr. Blackstone. They got in through Emma, and that means your family is still vulnerable. We need to have a conversation with her, not to blame her, but to teach her how to protect herself, and you need to implement training for all employees and their families." For the first time in hours, Richard Blackstone breathed deeply, feeling the weight being lifted from his shoulders. But more than relief, there was something new in his eyes when he looked at Kevin, genuine and deep respect. The silence that followed was different from all the previous ones in that room. It wasn't one of shock, embarrassment, or tension, but of pure respect and deep gratitude. Richard Blackstone slowly stood up, his eyes fixed on Kevin with an expression that mixed admiration, regret, and something that seemed almost like reverence. "Kevin," his voice came out, hoarser than normal, loaded with genuine emotion that he didn't try to hide. "I need to start by asking for your forgiveness, not just for the words I said, but for the man I was in that moment." He paused, clearly struggling to find words that would do justice to the magnitude of what had happened. "You just saved not only our company, but the livelihood of thousands of families, the personal data of millions of customers, and," his voice failed for a moment, "probably saved my daughter from a guilt that would destroy her if she knew she was used this way." One by one, the executives began to applaud, first the IT director, then the CFO, then all the others, until the entire room echoed with sincere and prolonged applause. Kevin felt his cheeks warm, not from shame this time, but from a good warmth, from deserved recognition that came from people who now truly understood his value. "Mr. Blackstone," Kevin said when the applause diminished, rising from the chair with a natural dignity that contrasted with the humility in his words, "you don't need to apologize. I perfectly understand that you were under pressure that few men could bear. Seeing your daughter being used against everything you built for her, any father would react the same way." The generosity of Kevin's response, not just forgiving but genuinely understanding Blackstone's pain, had a visible impact on the CEO. His hands trembled slightly when he approached Kevin, extending his right hand in a gesture that was both a handshake and a silent request for reconciliation. "You're a better man than I am," Blackstone said simply, shaking Kevin's hand firmly, "and I want to try to be worthy of the example you gave me today." Kevin shook the offered hand, feeling the sincerity in the firm grip and direct gaze of the older man. "We all have difficult moments, Mr. Blackstone. What matters is how we choose to respond afterward." Blackstone nodded, then took a deep breath before continuing. "Kevin, I need to do more than apologize. I want to offer you a permanent position as Megacorp's cybersecurity specialist, starting salary of $120,000 annually, complete health benefits for you and your family, Full-time with flexibility to finish your studies. He paused, carefully observing Kevin's reaction. And I want you to personally lead security training for all our executives and their families, starting with Emma. Kevin remained silent for a moment, carefully considering the offer. Everyone in the room could see that he was genuinely thinking, weighing not just the financial benefits, but something deeper. Mr. Blackstone, I'm deeply grateful for the offer, and I accept working with you, Kevin said finally. But there was something in his tone that indicated he hadn't finished. But I have one condition. Anything, Blackstone responded immediately. I'll only accept part-time. Mornings, from 8 a.m. to noon. I need to maintain my personal ethical hacking projects and my study routine. Kevin spoke with respectful but firm confidence. I can lead the training, do remote consulting when necessary, and be available for emergencies like today's, but I don't want to completely tie myself to a traditional corporate structure. The request surprised some of the executives, who exchanged intrigued looks. Blackstone, however, smiled, the first genuine smile Kevin had seen from him. You're negotiating with me, Blackstone said, and there was admiration in his voice. Even after saving our company, you maintain your principles and priorities. That's impressive. It's not that I don't value the opportunity, Kevin explained. It's that I like my life. I like the autonomy, my projects, the possibility of helping different companies with different challenges. Part-time would allow me to contribute significantly here without giving up who I am. Blackstone extended his hand again. I accept your conditions. $60,000 for part-time, proportional benefits, and total flexibility for your personal projects. And Kevin, he shook the young man's hand, thank you for teaching me that true talent has its own conditions, and we should respect them. The room erupted in applause again, but this time there was something different in the air. Not just admiration for what Kevin had done, but respect for what he had chosen not to do. He had proven he could have anything he wanted, and chose to stay true to his own values. There's one more thing, Kevin added when the applause ceased. I'd like to meet Emma personally, not to blame her or make her feel bad, but to teach her how to protect herself, and so she knows that none of this was her fault. Blackstone's eyes filled with tears that he didn't try to hide. She would love to meet you. In fact, when I tell her what happened today, I'm sure she'll insist on meeting the young man who protected our family. 2 weeks later, Kevin was in his new office on the 35th floor of Megacorp, a modest space but with a panoramic view of Seattle that still seemed surreal for someone who until recently had been delivering documents through the hallways. He had kept his word. He worked from 8 a.m. to noon, then went to the gym, studies, and his independent ethical hacking projects. The routine he had built remained intact, just enriched by a job that truly valued his skills. It was a Friday morning when Emma Blackstone appeared at his office door. Kevin looked up from the security report he was preparing and immediately recognized the young woman from the photo he had seen on her father's phone screen during that crisis. She was about 21 years old, with wavy blonde hair that fell gracefully over her shoulders and the same penetrating blue eyes as her father, but there was something in her posture, a mixture of determination and vulnerability, that made her unique. You must be Kevin, she said, knocking lightly on the open door. I'm Emma Blackstone. I came to introduce myself. And so well to apologize. Kevin immediately stood up, surprised by the unexpected appearance. Emma, please come in. And you don't need to apologize for anything. Actually, I really wanted to meet you. She entered the office, quickly glancing at the panoramic window, before focusing her attention completely on Kevin. My father told me everything that happened, how you were treated, how you came back anyway to save us, and how, she paused, clearly emotional, how you protected me without even knowing me. Kevin gestured to the chair in front of his desk. Please sit down. Your father didn't tell me much about you, except that you had no fault at all in what happened. Emma sat down, but maintained an upright and attentive posture. That's what impressed me most when he told me the story. You could have been angry, could have let us deal with the problem alone after being humiliated. Her eyes shone with genuine admiration. But you chose to help, and not just help, but protect. Someone you didn't even know, me, from feeling guilty about something that wasn't under my control. Kevin sat down again, observing the young woman in front of him with growing interest. There was an intelligence in her eyes that combined with an emotional maturity he hadn't expected to find. Emma, can I ask you a personal question? Kevin said softly. Of course. How are you dealing with all this? Knowing you were used to attack your father's company must be difficult." Emma sighed. And for the first time since she'd entered, her perfect composure showed a crack. It was devastating, to be honest. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about how stupid I was, how I should have been more careful. She looked down at her hands. "But then my father explained what you said, that I was a calculated target, that they studied me and created a trap specifically for me. That helped me understand it wasn't stupidity on my part, but rather a sophisticated operation." Kevin nodded approvingly. "Exactly. These people spend weeks, sometimes months, observing their targets. They knew exactly which buttons to push to make you lower your guard. There's no shame in being deceived by professionals of deception." "That's why I want to learn," Emma said, her voice gaining new determination. "My father said you're going to create security training. I want to be your first student, not out of obligation, but because I never want to feel so vulnerable and exposed again." Kevin smiled, genuinely impressed with her attitude. "It would be an honor to teach you, but know that the training isn't just about technology, it's about psychology, about understanding how manipulators operate, about developing instincts to recognize when something isn't right." "Perfect," Emma responded. "I'm studying organizational psychology at the university. I think we can learn a lot from each other." They spent the next hour talking about digital security, but the conversation naturally evolved to other topics. Kevin discovered that Emma was in her senior year of college, writing her thesis on how to create more inclusive and empathetic corporate cultures. She, in turn, was fascinated to learn about Kevin's independent projects, especially his work helping small businesses protect themselves from cyber attacks. "You know," said Emma as she prepared to leave, "when my father told me about you shouting in Russian and silencing the entire room, I thought, I need to meet this person. But now that we've talked," she paused, smiling in a way that made something warm in Kevin's chest, "I'm more impressed by the fact that you came back to help people who hurt you." After she left, Kevin stood looking out the panoramic window for a few minutes, thinking about the conversation he'd just had. There was something about Emma, a combination of intelligence, humility, and determination, that intrigued him in a way he hadn't experienced before. He picked up the phone and called his mother, who was much better and had already returned home thanks to the new health plan that Megacorp offered. "Ioma," he said when she answered, using the Korean word of endearment for mother. "How are you feeling today?" "Much better, my son. And you? How's the new job?" Kevin smiled, looking around his new office. "It's going very well. And maybe I met someone interesting today." "Oh?" His mother laughed softly. "Tell me about her." "It's complicated, Ioma. She's my boss's daughter, but she's intelligent, determined, and has a good heart." Kevin paused. "I think you'd like her. If she has a good heart and makes you smile like that, then I already like her," his mother replied. "Just remember, Kevin, the best human connections are built on mutual respect and shared values, not on position or convenience." "I know, Ioma, and I think that's exactly what makes her so interesting." 6 months had passed since that dramatic morning that changed everything. Kevin was now firmly established in his hybrid routine. Mornings at Megacorp as a cybersecurity consultant, afternoons dedicated to his independent projects and studies. His mother had recovered completely, and he had managed to buy a modest but comfortable house for the family, maintaining the balance between progress and humility he had always valued. Megacorp Technologies had become an example in the industry, not just for its spectacular recovery from the security crisis, but for the cultural transformation that followed. Richard Blackstone, deeply impacted by the events and by how Kevin had responded to his own human fragility, had implemented revolutionary policies in the company. Weekly meetings were established where employees at all levels could share ideas directly with leadership. An internal talent identification program was created, specifically designed to discover hidden skills among employees who might be being underestimated. And most importantly, a pressure moments policy was established, a protocol that recognized that leaders under extreme stress could act harmfully, creating support systems to prevent and repair such situations. On a sunny spring afternoon, Kevin was finalizing a report on security improvements implemented in recent months when Emma appeared at his office door. In the months following their first meeting, they had developed a solid friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. Emma had become not only an exceptional student in digital security, but also a valuable collaborator, applying her psychology knowledge to make training more effective. "Kevin," she said, knocking on the open door, "I have interesting news. Please come in." Kevin smiled, saving his document. "What kind of news?" Emma sat in the familiar chair in front of his desk, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Remember that proposal we made last month about creating a security training program for small businesses that can't afford expensive consultants? Of course, what happened? My father approved not just the program, but decided that Megacorp will fund it as a corporate social responsibility initiative. He wants you to lead the project, still part-time, respecting your conditions." Emma paused, clearly excited. "Kevin, this means we'll be able to help hundreds of small businesses protect themselves for free." Kevin leaned back in his chair, genuinely impressed. "That's incredible. Your father really has changed, hasn't he?" "Completely," Emma agreed. "He always tells me that you taught him something no MBA course ever taught, that true leadership means recognizing when we're wrong and having enough courage to change." They spent the next hour planning the details of the new program, but Kevin noticed that there was something different in the energy between them. In recent months, their professional partnership had naturally evolved into something deeper, a connection based on shared values, mutual admiration, and a subtle chemistry that neither had addressed directly. "Emma," Kevin said when they finished reviewing the plans, "can I ask you a personal question?" "You always can," she replied, leaning slightly forward. "What do you see in your future? After college, I mean. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Emma considered the question carefully before answering. "I want to continue working to make the corporate world more human. Maybe open my own organizational psychology consulting firm, helping companies create cultures where talents like yours are recognized before a crisis forces that discovery." She paused. "And you? What are your dreams for the future?" "I want to expand my ethical hacking work. Maybe create an organization that helps not just companies but also schools, hospitals, non-profits, places that do good in the world but don't have resources to protect themselves adequately." Kevin hesitated for a moment, then continued. "And I like the idea of having partners in this mission, people who share the same vision about using talents to help others." Their eyes met for a moment longer than usual, and both seemed to recognize that they were talking about something bigger than professional plans. "You know," Emma said softly, "when we met, you taught me that the best partnerships are built on mutual respect and shared goals. I think," she smiled, an expression that made Kevin's heart accelerate slightly, "I think we have a very solid foundation for any kind of partnership we decide to explore." Kevin smiled back, feeling a quiet happiness spreading through his chest. "I completely agree, and, to be honest, I can hardly wait to discover where this partnership might take us." That night, Kevin called his mother as he always did before sleeping. "How was your day, my son?" she asked. "It was a good day, Ioma. Emma and I got approval for a project that will help many small businesses, and—" he paused, smiling in the darkness of his room. "I think we're starting to explore possibilities beyond work." His mother laughed softly. "Ah, finally you're realizing what I've noticed since the first time you mentioned her name. And what would that be?" "That sometimes, my son, the best things in life come not when we look for them, but when we're busy doing good for others. You met her because you chose to help, even when your heart was hurt. That's how you build not just careers, but also relationships that last a lifetime." Kevin smiled, looking out his bedroom window at the lights of Seattle twinkling in the distance. "You're right, as always, Ioma. Just remember," she added, with the wisdom of someone who had lived much and learned about what really matters, "true love, like true friendship, flourishes when two people decide to build something bigger than themselves. It seems like you're already doing that." 2 years had passed since that gray morning in Seattle that changed everything. Kevin was now in a position he never could have imagined, not just as a cybersecurity consultant for Megacorp, but as founder of his own non-profit organization, the Digital Shield Foundation, dedicated to providing free cyber protection for schools, hospitals, and small businesses. Emma had graduated with honors in organizational psychology and had become his partner both professionally and personally. Together, they had developed a revolutionary model that combined technical security with psychological training, creating defenses that were both technological and human. Megacorp Technologies had become a case study at business schools around the world, not just for its spectacular recovery from a security crisis, but for the cultural transformation that followed. Richard Blackstone had become one of the most respected CEOs in the tech industry, known not for his business aggressiveness, but for his empathetic leadership and corporate policies that prioritized human development alongside financial growth. On a sunny spring afternoon, Kevin was back at his old high school in an underprivileged Seattle neighborhood, speaking to students about opportunities in technology. The auditorium was packed with young people who saw themselves reflected in his story, talented, ambitious, but limited by circumstances. "The truth," Kevin said to the attentive audience, "is that all of you have skills the world needs. The question isn't whether you're capable, you are. The question is whether you'll have the courage to use those skills not just for your own benefit, but to help others even when it's difficult." Among the audience, he noticed a young Latino in the third row, disheveled hair, worn but clean uniform, eyes bright with intelligence masked by a shy posture that Kevin instantly recognized in himself. After the talk, the student approached hesitantly, his hands trembling slightly with nervousness. "Mr. Chen," he said in a low voice, "I'm Carlos Mendoza. I'm 17 and, well, I think I understand computers, but no one has ever taken it seriously." He looked down at his feet. "My parents work cleaning offices at night, and I deliver pizza after school to help with bills. But when I get home, late at night, I study programming alone on the old computer we managed to buy used." Kevin felt his heart race, not with nervousness, but with deep and familiar recognition. It was like looking into a mirror of the past, seeing himself reflected in the hopeful but cautious eyes of the young man in front of him. "Carlos," Kevin said, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder with the same gentle gesture he would have liked to receive when he was his age, "you want to know a secret? A few years ago, I was exactly like you. I worked as a delivery guy, my family was struggling, and I studied programming in my spare time because it was the only thing that made me feel like I had a future." Carlos's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide, but Kevin could see hope fighting against years of discouragement. Do you really think I can achieve something in life?" "I don't just think so." Kevin took a business card from his pocket. "I know it, and more than that, I want to help you prove to yourself how capable you are." He handed the card to the young man. "I want you to come to Megacorp next week. We have a mentorship program for talented students like you, flexible hours so it doesn't interfere with your studies or work, and direct guidance from me and my team." Carlos held the card as if it was something precious, his hands still trembling. "But what if I'm not good enough? What if I disappoint you?" Kevin smiled, remembering his own doubts in the elevator that transformative day. "Carlos, the only way to disappoint me and my team would be if you didn't try. Talent doesn't have social class, doesn't have a last name, doesn't have an address. What you have in your mind and heart is all that matters." After Carlos left, clearly floating between hope and disbelief, Kevin stayed for a few minutes in the empty school courtyard, observing the simple building where so many young people like him had passed without anyone noticing their true potential. Emma arrived shortly after, finding him lost in contemplative thoughts. "How was the talk?" she asked, hugging him from behind. "I found another one," Kevin said softly, leaning into the familiar warmth of her embrace. "Another young person like I was, full of talent, no opportunity, working double just to help the family survive. And?" Kevin turned to her, his eyes shining with the same determination he had felt in that transformative elevator years before. "And I'm going to give him the same chance someone gave me. I'm going to show him that his value isn't defined by where he works, where he came from, or what last name he carries." Emma smiled, kissing him softly. "That's exactly why I fell in love with you. You didn't just change your own life. You can't help changing other people's lives." As they walked back to the car, Kevin reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him from the insecure young delivery guy to the mentor he was today. The humiliation in that conference room, which at the time seemed like the end of the world, had become the catalyst for a transformation that echoed far beyond his personal experience. "You know," he said to Emma as they drove through the familiar streets of his old neighborhood, "I'm still grateful for That terrible moment when your father yelled at me. Why? Because it taught me that our response to pain defines who we really are. I could have chosen bitterness, revenge, or simply left hurt. Kevin paused, watching a mother walking with her young child on the sidewalk, both dressed simply but with dignity. But I chose to help even while being hurt, and that choice created waves that are still spreading. Emma squeezed his hand. And now you're creating a world where young people like Carlos don't have to wait for a crisis to be recognized. The next morning, Kevin was back on the 35th floor of Megacorp Technologies, but this time accompanied by Carlos, who looked around with the same wide eyes Kevin had had years before. The difference was that now Carlos was being received not as an intruder, but as a potential future leader. Nervous? Kevin asked as they walked down the black marble corridor that had once seemed so intimidating. Very, Carlos admitted, his voice still, laden with insecurity. I can't believe I'm really here. Kevin stopped in front of the conference room where it all began, the same space where he had been rejected, where he had made the decision to return and help, where he had found his true strength. You know what helped me when I was in your position? Kevin placed his hand on Carlos's shoulder, remembering that real talent doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs opportunity to shine, and people who believe it's worth investing. Then when they entered the room, Richard Blackstone was there, now a man completely transformed by the events that had redefined his perspective on leadership and human value. He greeted Carlos with the same genuine respect he offered any senior executive. Carlos, Kevin told me about your interest in technology and your self-taught work. I'm eager to see what you can do with adequate resources. Blackstone smiled warmly. And I want you to know, at this company, we value potential as much as experience. Sometimes, even more. Later that day, when Carlos was being guided by other team members, Kevin stayed alone in the conference room for a few moments, looking out the panoramic window where he had once contemplated his decision to return and help. The city of Seattle stretched out before him, full of millions of people living their own journeys, facing their own moments of choice between wounded pride and compassion, between self-preservation and altruism. Kevin thought about all, the lives that had been touched by that moment of decision in the elevator, his own family, Emma, Megacorp employees, customers who had their data protected, Richard Blackstone and his personal transformation, and now Carlos and all the future young talents the foundation would help discover. Sometimes, he murmured to himself, echoing the words he had said to Blackstone months before, the people we least expect have exactly what we need most, and sometimes we discover that we ourselves are. Those people are just waiting for the right moment to choose kindness over bitterness. The afternoon sun painted the conference room with a golden, warm light, so different from the cold and desperate atmosphere of that grey morning that had changed everything. Kevin smiled, feeling a deep gratitude for having chosen love over resentment, help over retaliation, understanding over judgment. Somewhere in the city, another talented young person was probably facing their own moment of testing, their own choice between giving up and persevering, between hiding their gifts and sharing them with the world. Kevin was sure that, when the time came, they too would find the courage to make the right choice, because that's the true magic of compassion. It multiplies, creating waves of transformation that travel far beyond the initial moment of choice, touching lives in ways we could never imagine. And it all starts with one person brave enough to do what's right, even when their heart is hurt. Especially when their heart is hurt. In the end, Kevin had learned that true strength doesn't come from never being hurt, but from choosing to help others even when we're bleeding inside. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most important lesson of all. This story moves me every time I tell it, because I know many of you have been through similar situations. Maybe you were underestimated at work, or saw someone being unfairly treated, or had to make a difficult decision between wounded pride and doing what's right. In the comments, share. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated who later proved their worth? Or maybe you yourselves were that Kevin at some point in life. If this story touched you in some way, please like it so more people can know it. And if you know someone who needs to hear about how compassion can transform moments of pain into opportunities for growth, share this video. Sometimes, the right story at the right time can change someone's perspective on their own difficulties. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, Sometimes the people we least expect have exactly what we need most. Until the next story.